I really enjoy playing around with and having fun experimenting with, and it's brewing my own beer. At the very beginning of the Lutheran Church was women in leadership doing environmental advocacy for the sake of good beer.
Hello and welcome to Stitchology. I am Pastor Tina Krog, she, her, hers, and I serve alongside St. Jacob Lutheran Church in Massillon, Ohio.
And I am Angel Jackson, she, her, hers, and I serve alongside the people of St. Jacob's Lutheran Church in North Canton, Ohio. And I get to introduce our special guest, Deacon Nick Bates, also a longtime, who is the director of the Hunger Network of Ohio. So we figured, since we're talking about soul food, our friend Nick, advocate, deacon in the ELCA, which is pastors and deacons, word and sacrament versus word and servant, how we work. You're also a lawyer.
I am. I don't like talking about that part too
Not
much.
know that. I have no idea.
Yeah, we try to keep that part on the down low.
It's why he's so good at advocating for folks by getting laws changed on behalf of folks. So I have known you for 8 years. I'm just learning this. That's a way of connecting the world and the church.
Law and gospel kind of right there together.
So maybe Pastor Tina wants to talk about what she's crafting right now.
I am still working on my Barbara Ann design. Now my office craft. I like to keep a stash of crafts in the office, for a rainy day or a really boring meeting. Yeah, that's what I'm working on. What are you working on?
I'm working on my purse craft. I don't have it in my hand right now, but it's the washcloth I keep in my purse because it's portable, and then for a boring meeting or moment, it's crochet. So I'm crocheting right now. I love knitting crochet. It's a break from the endless Tree of Life again that I cannot finish.
And you're really gonna recommend that Tree of Life?
I'm gonna recommend it. Full. You're gonna love it when you finish.
She's clearly loving working on it. Just a little.
Nick Bates,
Yeah.
do you craft?
So in many ways, I find myself struggling with crafts, but then there's one thing I have found that I really enjoy playing around with and having fun experimenting with, and it's brewing my own beer.
I think that's totally a craft, and a craft off of Luther's own heart.
It is. And I just love this one story I heard back when we were at Capitol that Martin Luther's wife, Katie Luther, went, and one of the most important ingredients in beer is the water. And you need good quality water. And I've hung out with chemists and people who do, all the different things that are in the water, and professional brewers do all that. Well, Katie Luther brewed beer and wanted good water. So she went to the town council and said, we have to make it so no one can throw trash in the river on this day, so that the very next morning I can go down and get clean water for my beer. So at the very beginning of the Lutheran Church was women in leadership doing environmental advocacy for the sake of good beer. So it's a very proud tradition I think we're a part of here.
So one of the things that we talk about here is about how crafting can be a devotional experience. And I'm wondering, do you feel connected to the creator when you're creating some sweet brews?
Yeah, I really do, because especially as friends of mine have started to grow their own hops over the years, and the hop plants often take multiple seasons to cultivate and get going. So there's that very, tangential connection to the earth in that creation. And then I always love looking at the history of beer and how it has helped human civilization for thousands of years kind of evolve and advance, because every time a civilization started to develop, the water became polluted, but having beer or fermented beverages was one way to provide clean water and drinkable water. And obviously the best part then is to invite people over and get together with friends and others, or to give away a little homemade gift basket to family and friends at the holidays. Could also include a few bottles of our homemade beer.
Amazing. Really cool. Yeah.
As one of our crafting options for this soul food series, baker Don Princehorn has curated a weekly bread recipe for us. You can find that recipe in the Soul Food Stitch-Along Drive. Access to the drive can be found at our website, stitchologycrafts.com, and selecting the Soul Food button. Here's a little taste of why Don selected this week's recipe. See what I did there? Taste.
Miss Dawn, what is your bread for us for week 1?
The bread I would have for you is New York Deli Rye.
All right. That sounds delicious. Why is this a favorite recipe of yours?
Well, it's easy to make. It has a lot of ingredients, but it's very easy to make. It doesn't take a lot of effort. And it turns out really well for me most of the times, all the time, really. And it's my favorite bread to give to people because I know it's going to turn out well.
This seems like the perfect recipe to start us out with. So I'm very, very grateful. And there is a secret ingredient in this recipe that you've told me about. And what is
Yes,
it?
the secret ingredient is sour pickle juice.
That is so interesting. So I'm going to have to go home and make this because I always have several jars of dill pickle in my refrigerator because Sophia loves pickle.
Now, I will tell you that I didn't have any pickle juice, sour pickle juice one day. So I used pickled beets. It tasted just as good, but the bread turned out pink.
That seems like a wonderful accidental occurrence. Well, thank you so very much. I can't wait to try it.
Here at Stitchology, we recognize that prayer is important because its purpose is to help us take note of where God is in our lives. And while we fully support the formal prayer, we also know that prayer can just be as simple as noticing where God is. And so we practice that type of prayer with one another.
Pastor Tina, where have you seen God this week? I am starting to realize that my 2-year-old Jillian is probably neurodivergent. Her dad is. She's got this new thing right now where everything she says, she adds the word cat. So, cheese cat. Want some bananas cat. And what I am loving about this is that you can tell she is doing this to punk her. Like she knows I'm on alert, but she looks at me and she'll, I'll repeat what she says and I just cat. And then she'll say, want some cheese cat. And they'll say, you want some cheese? Want some cheese cat?
I love that she can tell, even at age 2, that I'm paying attention to her and she's clever enough to punk me. I never would have thought to do that. I think her ability to detect my feelings is part of her neurodivergence. It's beyond what I would expect a neurotypical 2-year-old child to do. And I love that she's reminding me not to take it so seriously. It has been a real wonderful God moment for me.
How about you, Pastor Angel? Oh, where have I seen God this week? So I bought some basil today. Ooh. Which is funny because I also started basil from seed. And but it was in the clearance section. It was like basil that needed a home. I don't know why, but it's one of my favorite herbs, like fresh. And so as tomatoes are coming in,
Oh, yeah.
and mozzarella, and we go through a lot of basil. And last year, by the end of the summer, we had picked all of our plants clean. So it feels funny and decadent to buy more basil when I planted so much, but it was out of control and it needed a home. So, and I just think that that fresh flavor gives me the God in the world, a home in your belly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And Deacon Nick, where have you seen God this week?
Yeah. So Both I have a 9-year-old and a 14-year-old, and they both are on our YMCA swim team. And our 14-year-old, they've been swimming since, they were in 1st grade, right? So many years. And one of the coaches last year started just these periodic classes, kind of targeting some of the swim team parents. Like I've been in the water,
Right.
over the
You
past
know how to
25
swim.
years. I grew up along Lake Erie. I've kayaked, rowed and sailed boats and gone to summer camp and canoed. I know how to swim, but I haven't actually swam a lap in probably 25 years.
So you were telling me you were taking adult swim classes from the swim coach.
Yes. And so there's like 12 of us in this class, and I struggled to swim even to the 25 yard. And
Oh, dope.
it was tough. The hard thing was like my mind knew exactly what I should be doing, but my body wouldn't do it. I could see, no, my head needs to come up but it just wouldn't come up the way that it was supposed to. And my legs wouldn't move. So on one hand, it was like this moment of frailty and aging. But at the same point, I was surrounded by such a good community of other parents, and my wife was there, and all these other folks who were just all encouraging, and we were all struggling, and just kind of being in that community in that moment of that frailty. And luckily, I'm only 40, so I have time to hopefully get myself back into shape and be able to do this by the time I'm 50. But it's one of those things of just how weak we can be and how frail our bodies are, but then on how the community can still surround you.
Well, being invited into doing that, right? Like that's something you were just thinking about doing for yourself. That was a real act of vulnerability, and to be received in such a loving way. Oh, how affirming.
Really cool. And it's amazing. Our bodies are used to doing certain things,
Right.
that we can still retrain them.
Right.
Well, I admire your bravery. And also, I'm a little jealous because Jillian has been in a baby swim class, and I would like to pick up swimming again. I cannot find an adult beginner swim class. Like I know how to swim, but again, same thing. It's been 25 years. And so I would like a refresher.
A lot of programs will have like classes for those adults who have never learned how to swim, or those classes for people in their 70s and 80s who are just still trying to figure out how to move their bodies still. But there's kind of this gap of service that I was really excited that they're offering and seeing that need in the community.
It's really cool.
I'm Laura Franks Benton with Just Brave Enough, a writing collective I've formed with a diverse group of clergy women friends. We use holy imagination to write first-person narratives from the perspective of named and unnamed women of the Bible. From there, we create liturgy and no prep curriculum. Check us out and download a sample at justbraveenough.com. When I'm trying to jumpstart a writing project, I often will turn to poetry and writing prompts, and I'm excited to share one of each of those with you today. Love is My Daily Bread by Jamal Upshaw. Love is my daily bread, a nourishing core, strengthens my spirit always, not a fleeting fancy, a passionate craze, but a steady companion through life's winding maze. Kindness, the crust, a warmth I can share, compassion, the filling, a burden to bear, forgiveness, the butter, smoothing all strife, laughter, the sprinkle, a joyful life. With each loving bite, my spirit takes flight. Love's nourishment fuels me, morning, noon, and night. A simple, essential, a need to be fed. Love is my daily bread, the best kind of bread. A freshly baked loaf of bread is the metaphor here for contentment. Upshaw uses each part of the loaf to describe the ingredients of contentment. Warmth is in the crust, compassion the filling, forgiveness as the butter coats the bread, and laughter sprinkling joy all over life and creation. So today, think about your favorite food, maybe from grandma's kitchen or a church picnic. Perhaps it's cake or an ice cream sundae or a casserole or Jell-O salad. How does that dish make you feel? What ingredients, both literal and the attributes, make it just so? Jot down a list of those ingredients. Then consider turning that list into a poem as Jamal Upshaw did.
As I was thinking about what would be a good scripture passage to kick off the Soul Food series, I naturally thought about the way the church uses the phrase daily bread, right? I thought it would be good for us to touch base on a Bible passage we think that we know really well, the Lord's Prayer. We find one version of the Lord's Prayer in Matthew chapter 6. Now, Matthew is written for an audience that is primarily Jewish. And the big question marks that drive Matthew are wonderings about how that Jewishness is affected by Jesus. That's why in Matthew, Jesus starts off his ministry with this big speech we call the Sermon on the Mount, where he expands the idea of what the kingdom of heaven on earth looks like. And as he's hitting the conclusion, the grand finale of this sermon, he gives us this text we call the Lord's Prayer. Matthew chapter 6, verses 1 through 15. This is the Common English Bible. Be careful that you don't practice your religion in front of people to draw their attention. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father who is in heaven. Whenever you give to the poor, don't blow your trumpet as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, so that they may get praise from people. I assure you, that's the only reward they'll get. But when you give to the poor, don't let your left hand know what your right hand is doing, so that you may give to the poor in secret. Your Father who sees what you do in secret will reward you. When you pray, do not be like the hypocrites. They love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners so that people will see them. I assure you, that's the only reward they'll get. But when you pray, go to your room, shut the door, and pray to your Father who is present in that secret place. Your Father who sees what you do in secret will reward you. When you do pray, don't pour out a flood of empty words as the Gentiles do. They think that by saying many words they'll be heard. Don't be like them, because your Father knows what you need before you ask. Pray like this: Our Father who is in heaven, uphold the holiness of your name. Bring in your kingdom, so that your will is done on earth as it's done in heaven. Give us the bread we need for today. Forgive us for the ways we have wronged you, just as we also forgive those who have wronged us. And don't lead us into temptation, but rescue us from the evil one. If you forgive others their sins, your heavenly Father will also forgive you. But if you don't forgive others, neither will your Father forgive your sins.
So, daily bread.
Yeah.
Daily bread is why we brought you here.
Yeah.
Well, maybe first start by telling us about your work.
Yeah. So at the Hunger Network in Ohio, we are an ecumenical ministry. We're Lutherans, Methodists. Well, and then anyone in non-land goes, anybody who shows up, we'll put them to work, right? But we work ecumenically, and we try to address those root causes of poverty through advocacy. So people often ask me what advocacy is, and I always say advocacy ministry is the same as all other kinds of ministry, word in sacrament, word in service, whatever. It's all about relationships. So as a church, we're in relationship with those who hunger, we're in relationship with those who volunteer, we're in relationship with those who donate. So shouldn't we be also in relationship with our lawmakers who have the power and that vocational call to do something about those root causes of poverty? So that's what we try to do. We try to engage our lawmakers, build those positive relationships with them. I wish it was like, a bunch of Mr. Smith goes to Washington moments, where I stand up and pontificate for hours on end. But in reality, it's, hey, Senator, I want you to meet this person who's running a food pantry in their congregation in your district. You need to hear their story. And how do we connect those stories to the lawmaker you're asking certain questions? And also sometimes to help those lawmakers remember their call as public. And what does it mean to be a servant? So for me, that when we look at this idea of daily bread, I love the way Luther describes it in the Small Catechism, all that we need for daily life. And he includes in that good government that is working for the people and for the community. We're doing a big push recently on school meals, trying to expanding school meals here in Ohio and making them more accessible to more kids. And some legislators said, well, we don't want to do it that way. We'd rather expand food pantry funding, or we'd rather do it this way, or look at childcare, or look at housing, and how do we balance all these different things? Great, let's have that conversation, right? On how do we address childhood hunger? Some legislators said, I don't care. And some legislators even said that in groups, like they said those words out loud, I just don't care that they're hungry kids. And so for me, that's where the church really needs to be vocal and say, no, we can disagree on how to solve the problem, but can't we agree that kids going hungry is a problem? Yeah.
Wow. I'm so grateful that you're helping us to rethink some of the legislative aspects of that, because that's actually what Jesus is talking about here in this text, right? I mean, back when these gospels were written, there was something called a daily bread tax that was imposed by the empire that limited who had access to grain and how much grain they could get every day and where that grain was distributed. And what we know is that grain distributions tended to happen in places where more wealthy people were, or the requirements to get the food was standing in line or doing an act of service. That would have been really hard to do if you were a farmer or if you worked far away to actually get there in time. Bread. I don't think it's an accident that Jesus is talking about the kingdom here. This is this pinnacle moment in his kingdom conversation when he's talking about food. This is more than just, I want that later, which I do. But it's about making sure my neighbor, when I'm praying for daily bread, I'm praying for my neighbor to have daily bread.
Yeah.
I think that you're both kind of talking about a shift from what we might call, sometimes we refer to in the nonprofit world as toxic charity, right? Like sometimes we get so wrapped up in what makes us feel good that like our preference would be to hand someone a piece of bread every day and get to see that kind of what your organization is doing. Is how do we back up and take a bigger view and make a change so that folks just have access to those things without a daily kind of interaction.
And then we'll look at the first part of chapter 6. It says, don't give to the poor, don't give your alms, so people see you doing it. So really, whether we're doing it through policy or we're looking at our own congregational ministry, having those questions with the agents that we're partnering with and asking, how can we be most supportive? How can we truly accompany you and walk alongside you in our ministries? I know a lot of groups, we're serving a meal once a month, right? And they were going to the store and buying all the food and taking it down and cooking a meal. Well, now some of those programs that used to have churches coming in now actually have paid chefs and cooks who are planning out a balanced meal diet in ways that most of our folks, we're just like, well, hey, this casserole serves 40 people real easily, not thinking about the sodium content and the nutritional quality that people who are really struggling are missing out on. Maybe it's we just give the money for them to be able to buy in bulk a healthier meal. So sometimes it pulls us away a little bit but that it's actually going to be more meaningful. And when we ask that question.
So when we're talking about soul food, we're talking about like nurturing the soul to help people for the longevity of their family and eating well and learning about health and nutrition and things like that as well.
Yeah.
Kind of, am I?
Yeah. And one of the things as we look at hunger in Ohio and across the United States, people often think hunger means you're going without any food, right? And we have these images from infomercials back in the 90s of, these super skinny, you can see the ribcage kids around the globe.
That's what we imagine.
That's what
when
we
think
imagine,
of
right?
hunger.
Yeah. And that leads us to a place of just sadness where we want to get that image away from us. So we send in that check so we don't have to see it anymore. So we're giving alms to alleviate our own. Ohio and throughout the United States, a lot of times hunger first manifests as malnourishment because you don't have access to proteins. You don't have access to fruits and vegetables. You're eating, high sodium food because that's low cost. And the stuff high in sugar because that's low cost. We have a great network of Feeding America Food Bank that help to go out to the farms. They're able to purchase all that excess produce, get it into the pipeline to help those food banks and give the food to the food pantries to get fruits and vegetables and proteins out to people. It's expensive, to have the semi trucks going out to farms buying that excess produce, because if you ever walk in a Walmart or Kroger or Giant Eagle or wherever, all the apples look really pretty. Most apples don't look pretty, right? Most apples are pretty ugly and weird shape, but and they still taste delicious, and they still have just as much nutritional quality. I did not grow up on a farm. I grow my tomatoes in my backyard in Columbus, Ohio now. I'm always shocked at how weird my peppers and tomatoes look because they don't look anything like the grocery store, but they're always amazing.
So what a cool thing that the food pantry is able to connect those that might go to waste because we don't want them at the grocery store with the people. And so sometimes when we give directly to food pantry in money, instead of, like you're saying, instead of your can go, like your money goes further.
Yeah,
because that helps the food
absolutely.
do those.
Yep.
So I am hearing the voice in my head that is asking, why don't you just teach them to fish? What are your thoughts on that type of approach to hunger equality?
Yeah. So at the Hunger Network, we kind of break our policy issues into 4 areas. The first is how do we make sure people are fed today? So this is like programs like the SNAP program that's federally funded through the Farm Bill, which is up for debate right now. It was due last year, but Congress is a little behind. They asked for an extension. That's the most effective and efficient way to address hunger. Also our food banks that we're just talking about and those things. But we also need to make sure we're creating equity and adequacy in our school systems. Because we know from pre-K through higher ed, and higher ed might mean 4-year degrees. It also might mean a plumbing certification. Higher ed is that entire gamut. And about 2 out of 3 jobs right now in Ohio require some type of post-high school training or certification.
So that is a little bit of teaching people to fish, right? Like that. Yeah.
Because those equitable and adequate educational resources aren't available to all students right now in the state. So that's kind of the second bucket of policy issues that we look at. The third is building an economy that works for all. My grandfather was a sharecropper in Alabama, went and fought in World War II, and then he moved up to Sandusky and got a job in an auto plant. He had protections of the union. He had access to health care and health insurance. And in one generation, so my grandpa and grandmother, didn't even have a middle school education. And then almost every single one of their kids had a master's degree or above within one generation, because that's the way the economy was working at the time.
Yeah.
But you can take the same exact experience. I have a friend, his family ended up moving to Akron from the same part of Alabama, but he couldn't get in the union because he was African American. He couldn't build up equity. And their family is still struggling economically because a lot of that, the GI Bill and programs in the 40s and 50s didn't work for African Americans. They were specifically designed to segregate. So how do we address that now? How do we build up an economy that works for all? And then also, as we look at it, we got to make sure we have healthy homes and communities, because the reality is if people don't have a loving, safe place to rest their head, safe drinking water to drink every night, if they're living in fear, it's going to be hard to prioritize getting a good education or getting that job training. So we have to make sure that we're looking at the whole person. So yeah, yes, we have to feed people today. And I often say, as a person of faith, I'm called to feed someone today, and I'm called to sit in the boat with them to fish, because the reality is they probably know how to fish better than I do. But the problem is the lake has been privatized and polluted. So how do we address those issues as well and work together and to make sure that everyone has enough food so that all are fed?
That is such a helpful framework. Um, my first call was in the same community that Pastor Angel served, and we worked with a lot of farmers, and we had a lot of hungry farmers.
Mhm.
And I did not understand some of the agricultural zoning of farmland in
Mm.
Ohio, that if a farmland was zoned for industrial farming, like there was a limit on how much could be used for private farming for private gardens. And all of that makes the difference when we're thinking
Mhm.
about food. We're not just talking about hunger issues in inner city environments. We're talking about like really hard working class people you who have jobs that are underserved and then or underpaid rather in all walks of life and in all areas of our government and our
Mhm.
governmental systems. I think that's really thinking about it this way about education, perhaps a way that we can help
Mhm.
teach people to fish is to help those of us with privilege learn about how our food system works.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's complicated. The idea that we have hungry farmers in Ohio, I think, shocks a lot of people.
Yeah.
Yet we do, and our most hungry counties in Ohio aren't Franklin, Cuyahoga, and Hamilton, Cleveland, Columbus, and Cincinnati. It's Southeast Ohio, because there are entire communities that don't have grocery stores. So what happens if the car breaks down? How do you get to the store? How do you get to the doctor? This is one of the things we saw during and still see because of the opioid epidemic. People would have an accident, need physical therapy. Well, I can't be driving an hour and a half to Columbus 2 or 3 times a week for physical therapy. Okay, well, we'll give you opioids to help you handle your pain
Yeah.
and hope you do your physical therapy on your own. And now we see that has just cascaded into the opioid epidemic that we're still facing here in this state.
So this conversation is reinforcing for me how complicated the issue of daily bread is,
Yeah.
right? Like first of all, I think it's important to say like, okay, so this prayer, praying that God give us our daily bread, as we think about prayer, we pray that God will do it and we have confidence that God will do it. And then we ask God to make us a part of
Mhm.
making it so, right? And so our prayers not only are to God, but they're also forming us. So I absolutely feel convicted to have something to do about hunger, but I think I sometimes get paralyzed by the complicated nature of it, right? Like, even when it comes to legislation, like I had farmers in my community who were telling me one thing,
Mhm.
and then I had farmers who were telling me something else as far as what was going to be helpful, in a
Mhm.
particular situation. And so it's so complicated to take a higher view. That's why I'm grateful for Hunger Network of Ohio and Nick Bates to be a resource, because I think personally, it's really difficult for individuals
Yeah.
to sort through this kind of thing. And so to have an organization that is keeping an eye on what's happening. And if I'm like, hey, Nick, I want to do something about hunger, you're able to
Yeah.
say, these are the things we're working on, right?
Yep.
So would you tell us how we can support your organization?
Yeah. Well, before I do that, one thing I want to emphasize to folks is the 132 people down in Columbus that are elected as House members and state Senate members, and our congressional representatives, even our township trustees and city council members, they have to take in the opinion and the expertise from the entire state or the entire village or the entire community, right? And they have to become experts on, what kind of steel do you use in building a bridge? And how do you run a school system? And how, and all these things.
Ta-da.
And so they're dealing with the complexities as well. But one of the things I think we all have is we are all experts in our own story.
Mhm.
And even as our stories are limited and only our perspective, I mean, this is one of the great things I love about the gospel is in our brokenness, in our shortcomings, in our just very narrow, limited worldviews, there is value in that. And we can still use that. But even when we don't fully understand, sometimes those phone calls or letters just saying, I met a hungry child today. I'm a school teacher and I have 3 hungry kids in my first period class that don't get breakfast before they come to school. I don't know the answer, but this is a problem.
Mm.
Even that message goes a long way. Now, for those who are looking to learn the policy and all of that, our website, hungernetohio.com. You can go there, sign up for advocacy alerts. We're looking at a few bills right now around increasing the minimum benefit for senior citizens on SNAP. Right now, it's $23 a month, which is an extremely small amount. We're trying to raise that up to $50 a month, especially because a lot of these seniors are caring for aging parents
Yeah.
and kids and grandkids
Yeah,
at the
the
same
family
time.
generation.
Yeah. So really trying to make sure that they have those couple of extra bucks. So we're looking at that around childhood hunger right now. We're looking at expanding school meals even further in our cafeterias, breakfast and lunch, to make sure those reach more kids. And we're also looking at higher education. A lot of people don't realize that a lot of college students are experiencing hunger now. So we got a proposal now, and all these are bipartisan. We try to definitely work in a bipartisan fashion whenever possible, because at the end of the day, programs are only going to last if everybody can agree on them. So a grant program to colleges and universities to help them set up anti-hunger programs on campus that fit their community, because the best way to do it isn't for the state of Ohio saying every college has to do it this way, but for those campus organizations, those social work students, those campus ministries to say, here's how we think that we can do this the best. And then the state will accompany them, this legislation passes. So those are 3 things I'm really optimistic for. There's many things that we're fighting against right now, but we don't need to go into all of it.
That's fantastic. Well, we can hear more about them at
Yeah.
the website. You also have provided form letters in the past where we've used them in our congregation if we don't know what words to say or what things might be helpful to make use of those in the midst of it.
And really, we're translators. I help people to translate their story into government language and translate what the government's doing into a language that actually makes sense to people.
It's a really great use of your head
Yeah.
to then translate. Fantastic.
I know that your work is specifically with hunger in Ohio. I do know a big question mark for a lot of folks right now is the impending famine that is happening in the Middle East, and people feel very convicted about that. Do you know of good organizations that you would recommend for people to possibly turn to be able to think about what hunger might look like, fighting hunger might look like for that?
Yeah, so I know in our Lutheran advocacy office in Washington, D.C., is looking at the Farm Bill and how to support the growing famine around the globe through our different advocacy programs. And the Farm Bill, we often think about it for crop insurance and for SNAP, but it also includes a lot of the global food programs that we provide support for. And it's nice because in that program, we've realized going in and dropping food is not the long-term solution. It can be address the immediate need, but the long-term solution has to be, how do we help build up functional economy? How do we get those local communities, those wells and solar panels and things like that, so they can be productive themselves without always relying on big chips coming in with American style
Really
food.
inefficient
Yeah,
kind of
very,
not providing the things that are needful for them.
through them, Lutheran World Relief, and many others. Church World Service, I know, is doing a lot of good work as well around the advocacy and connecting people into services.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Well, I'm so grateful that you made this time, and I feel like I've learned more things. We're never done learning. And we're so grateful for your time to come and speak with us. And as we close today and think about what whole food daily bread means, may the God of inspiration bless your creating and your resting.
Amen.
Thank you for listening to this episode of our Soul Food Stitch Along season. Please remember you can find all previous and upcoming craft alongs at our website at stitchologycrafts.com. It is there that you will find access to the bread recipes and the cross-stitch stitch-along pattern. Thank you to Deacon Nick Bates for being our special guest for this premiere episode. We would like to thank you for supporting us by being our listener. We are grateful for the support of our congregations. They acknowledge the recording associated with this ministry as a part of our pastoral outreach efforts, but that support has limits. All of the audio equipment, hosting fees, advertising costs, and even publishing episodes onto podcasting platforms comes out of our own pockets, which averages about $50 per episode. We invite you to prayerfully consider becoming a sponsor by making a donation at stitchologycrafts.com. Thanks again for listening, and until next time, happy stitching!